Morning, as we gather on this Easter Sunday celebration, who'd have ever thought that we would celebrate an Easter Sunday and no one could come to church? It's almost unbelievable, I think, but yet that is what's happening to us this year, because there is this fear of a coronavirus that's in our midst and around the world, and a lot of churches are closing down or being closed for these days of hopefully not too long. But I was thinking about that. How, on our way of going to St. Thomas for the mission, taking some things over there for people to pick up for our Easter celebrations. And it struck me that maybe this is exactly the kind of fear and the kind of way that the very first Easter Sunday was celebrated. You know, all of a sudden, the disciples find themselves without Jesus, and they are afraid because this Christ had been crucified by the Romans. They're still in the city of Jerusalem. They don't know what might happen to them. This wasn't joyous time for them in that sense. Much like for us today, it is not a time joy-filled. We desire to get back to normal and the things that we'd like to see happen on a regular basis. We don't know when that's going to happen. That was the same kind of maybe fear that occupied those apostles that first day of the Easter season. And I think sometimes maybe it's good for us to ask the question, how do we get to this Easter day itself, and what is it supposed to say to us? The scripture that the church gives us is a pretty somber one. But this day started earlier, as you remember perhaps if you've ever in the past gone to the Easter Vigil service. There's 4 significant parts in that liturgy. It begins in darkness, and all of a sudden a candle is lit, the Easter candle, symbolizing that darkness does not have the final say. Truth will end and win the day at the end. That a candle is processed in, the Exultet is sung, and then for a period of time we sit down and listen to 7 readings from the Old Testament. All statements about God's love for the human race and how this plan of love was unfolding throughout the many centuries that he called his people to be his own. And that service of the word was then followed by the blessings of the waters of baptism. Because once now we know that this is God's plan, we enter into that love relationship by entering the waters of baptism. And so the waters were blessed. And we ended the Easter Vigil service at the altar. It's kind of interesting as you look at our scenery back here that there is an Easter candle. There is the baptismal font. There is the amble. There is the altar. Those are structural elements of what the Christian faith is kind of built on. Out of this Easter mystery that started last night in that Easter Vigil service with darkness. But now, this day, we arrive where we ended up last night, again at the altar. And we're told a story from John's Gospel about 3 characters. And if we look at those characters deeply, perhaps we learn something about our own selves, about what life of faith looks like. There's a Mary Magdalene, there's Peter, and a beloved disciple. And the story begins with Mary of Magdala going to the tomb, and John says it's still dark. It's very early in the morning. There isn't the clearness of light yet here for her. We're not told why she goes. Perhaps she wants to anoint the body, but it's not said. I think more significantly, probably it's because she's grieving. She has had someone in her life that has meant the world to her. Another gospel reminds that she had 7 demons removed from her. So she's a very grateful woman. And this one who she loved so much, who gave so much to her, is now gone. We can understand that coming to the gravesite for that. But it says she only sees the stone rolled away. She doesn't even look into the tomb. And all of a sudden she runs back and tells Peter and the beloved disciple. And they run to the tomb. Just as Mary was going to the tomb out of love, they run out of love because what's happened here? And they do. They not only look into the tomb, but they see the burial cloths. And it's a little different for the beloved disciple and Peter. The beloved disciple arrives first. Maybe he's a younger man. He outruns Peter. He looks in and he sees the burial cloths. But he waits for Peter, and Peter goes in. And it says he too sees the burial cloth, with the wrapping around the head laying in a separate place. And then all of a sudden, the beloved disciple, the one who arrived first, comes in. And it simply says he saw and believed. And his love is a little different than Peter's, different than Mary of Magdala. What did he see? What did he believe? He obviously saw the burial cloths, but perhaps there's another sense of seeing going on here. Because this beloved disciple, if he truly was the disciple of Christ, had heard the words that Christ preached in his public ministry, that he had to go to Jerusalem, suffer and die, and the third day he would rise. Perhaps he heard that more deeply and richly than any of the other disciples, like Peter. Perhaps when he saw Jesus raise the son of the widow of Nain's son who had died, he understood there's something really significantly different about this one called Jesus of Nazareth. He was there perhaps as he remembered the story of Lazarus, who comes out of a tomb and Jesus says, untie him. And a very different thing, because these burial cloths are left in a tomb. They're not going to be used again. But the Lazarus story, when he came out and had to be untied, meant he might die again. Is this what's going on in the mind and the heart of the beloved disciple, the one whom loved Jesus, it says? Love seems to have this ability to discern truths or the presence of God in a way that isn't just a mind and an intellectual kind of a gift. You know, we say the heart has reasons, the mind knows not. So he represents another kind. And in all this, perhaps what's going on here is this Easter story is a story just about love, the different dimensions of love. In the Greek language, there's 4 fundamental words for love. One is eros, which is a physical love. There's also storge, a word that's used for brothers and sisters as family love. Philia, where we get the word Philadelphia from, meaning a love for your countrymen, a patriotism. And the 4th level of love is agape, divine love. They're all love, but they're at different levels. And Pope Benedict, when he was as Pope, his first year of his pontificate, he wrote an encyclical called Deus Caritas Est, God is love. And one of the great things I remember reading in that, he spoke about love being a continuum. You know, we think agape love, that divine love, is really the measure of all love, and the other ones really are insignificant. But Pope Benedict says, no, this is a continuum. Physical love grows into this more psychological, this moral, this spiritual dimension. It ends up in agape. And I wonder if that's what's kind of going on in this story here. We're being reminded on Easter. Easter is about love. God's love for us as he comes into the human condition, takes on the human condition, dies in human condition, but now rises and tells us that's the end story. On our part, we have to be loved too. But maybe we're like Mary of Magdala, who maybe represents that eros love. She's there coming early in the morning when it's dark, doesn't have that full enlightenment of love, but it's a love. In fact, just later on in this particular story from John's Gospel, when Jesus does encounter Mary Magdalene, he reminds her, don't cling to me. This isn't a physical thing. This is a much more deeply spiritual. We'd like to end up in this agape love, this divine love. But there's these stages that we go through. And perhaps Peter, who seemingly is bewildered and confused as he sees the burial cloths, but doesn't have that insight that the beloved disciple does, he represents another level of love. And then, of course, there is the beloved disciple who is gifted with this ability to see and believe just because of things he's put together, what God has reminded him of, what God has put in his life, and he's been able to discern. Some of the church fathers remind us, some people, this agape, divine love, comes without pain. For others, it comes in pain. And for still others, it only comes at the end. Maybe that's the great Easter story that we need to. We come in love, hopefully, because the Eucharist is that Easter feast again and again, where the risen one, the glorified Christ, comes to us, feeds us with this love that's unbelievable, his own body and his own blood. We come, hopefully, because in faith and in love, maybe some of us come like Mary Magdalene. It's a much more material and hands-on, tactile love that we need. Perhaps some come like, Peter, a little bewildered and confused. But there's something about this Jesus I cannot give up on. And hopefully maybe some come like the beloved disciple with an agape love that's unbelievable in its ability to perceive his presence in our midst. That bread and wine is not just bread and wine. It's nothing less than the body and blood of the risen, glorified Jesus Christ, who promised, I'll be with you until the end of ages. Perhaps that's the Easter story that began on the Easter Vigil with that darkness, but darkness doesn't win. The light trumps darkness. And so we come then listening to that scripture again more deeply and richly than we ever have. And that's the reason why we want to be baptized, to be communed and conjoined with the risen one. And we will come and eat of his mystery, his divine love, as he gives us nothing less than his body and blood. What could be a greater Easter story than that, to understand that, and to be a people on that love journey? I pray you have a very blessed Easter day, and the next 50 days of the Easter season will be a time when once again we'll be able to gather as a community, celebrating the Lord in our midst, the divine lover. And we come giving back human love, hopefully to be elevated and dignified by agape love at the very end of our lives. A blessed Easter to all of you.